The story begins with a man named Zhou Yi, carrying a giant monster claw with a group of people. The commander shouted that they had to listen to him. If they didn't carry it all before nightfall, they could forget about dinner. Maybe even their lives. They needed to move faster. He pointed at Zhou Yi, yelled at him, called him trash, and asked why he was hesitating. Zhou Yi kept going, thinking to himself that he was just an ordinary person trying to survive in this terrible world. In the year 2026, the world was hit by a disaster no one could explain. Giant bugs crawled out from underground, causing chaos and destruction. Fighting these endless monsters in deep caves reminded people of going through high-level dungeons and games. People called this disaster the Abyss. The Abyss gave off strange radiation. Some people got special powers because of it. They were called the Awakened. But those who didn't get powers had to do the worst jobs, just to get food and survive. Zhou Yi and another man struggled but finally managed to load the claw into a truck. Then they collapsed on the ground, completely exhausted. The commander walked over and slapped Zhou Yi hard in the face, asking what he was even doing there. He accused him of pretending to be poor and weak. Zhou Yi held back his anger and asked if the commander had hurt his hand by slapping him. The commander called him an idiot and said if he couldn't work, he should leave. Zhou Yi said he could still go on. He pointed at the huge monster body nearby and said they had to move the rest before dark, or they wouldn't get any food. Then he got up and shouted that they would definitely finish the job. Suddenly the ground started shaking. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Zhou Yi looked to the side and asked in fear, "Was that an earthquake?" Then he saw something shocking, a giant monster coming out of the ground. The commander froze and said it was still alive. Then, when the shock wore off, everyone ran. As Zhou Yi ran, he passed the commander. The commander didn't like that. He pulled out a gun and shot Zhou Yi in the leg. Zhou Yi fell. The commander laughed and ran past him, yelling that it wasn't a big loss to leave trash behind as bait for the monster. Zhou Yi tried to stand up. He now understood. The commander used him as a distraction so they could escape. But why? He just wanted to live. Why was that so hard? He was weak, had no powers, and sooner or later, people like him were always left behind. He started to cry. Then a cockroach crawled onto his hand. He looked at it and thought, "In this world, only cockroaches have it easy. They can eat anything. They don't have to run like me, and even the abyss can't kill them." Just then, a huge monster attacked him. Zhou Yi thought that it would be great if he could become a cockroach in his next life. Suddenly, a system voice spoke. Body modification had started. The evolution system had activated. It tried many times to rebuild him, but failed again and again, until the 1,599,999th attempt finally worked. Zhou Yi saw only darkness and wondered if he had died. He lifted his hand, but what he saw wasn't human. He saw a mirror nearby and was shocked. He had really turned into a cockroach. He couldn't believe it. He shouted, "Did I really become a tiny cockroach?" Zhou Yi now had another pair of arms, and strangely, it felt natural, like they had always been there. He didn't feel weird controlling them. The only discomfort came from the muscles in his back. Suddenly, he started to fly. He was shocked. He lost control, crashed into a wall, and fell to the ground. He realized that if he could just control the muscles in his back, he could make the wings move properly. He stood up, annoyed, and said loudly that if he had known his dying wish would really come true, he would have wished for something better. Just then, a messenger of the cockroach god appeared. It called Zhou Yi greedy and said how dare he insult the feelings of the cockroach god. In 5,000 years, Zhou Yi was the first person to pray to him for power. The god had wanted to give him great strength, but now he was disappointed. Zhou Yi got nervous. He realized that the things he had read in stories might actually be true. He knelt down, first calling him System, but quickly changed it to Godfather. He apologized, saying he was wrong. The messenger disappeared. A system window appeared and said the system had been disabled. The cockroach god now hated him. Zhou Yi felt terrible. He said it really hurt, and over the next few days, he cried and begged for the system to come back. But nothing worked. Other cockroaches began watching him. trying to figure out what he was doing. Zhou Yi realized something strange. He could now understand cockroach language. One evening, he sat near a group of cockroaches and thought that even though he had wished to be one, he still felt grossed out by how they looked. They were eating feces, and he thought it was even more disgusting. Then, one cockroach came up to him holding a piece of poop and said, "Eat it while it's hot." Zhou Yi panicked and told it to stay away. The cockroach insisted, saying he shouldn't be shy. It actually liked the taste, and Zhou Yi should try it too. Zhou Yi got angry, hit it with his fist, and shouted again to stay away. The cockroach, now lying in pain, said Zhou Yi had hurt his feelings and asked for forgiveness, but also asked him to hold his breath next time, because his breath smelled like poop. On the 5th evening, Zhou Yi lay on the ground. He thought that even though human genes were strong, he was starting to enjoy the smell of feces. He needed real food soon, or he might go crazy and actually eat something awful. Even though plastic bags blocked the smell for most cockroaches, his human memory helped him guess where food might be. He dug through the trash and found an old egg yolk pie. It was 3 years expired, and he tore open the package. A system alert popped up, saying it had 385 calories. Zhou Yi looked at it in disgust, complaining about how expired it was. But then his stomach growled. He started eating and admitted that even though humans couldn't eat it, for a cockroach, it was delicious. That's why he had wished to become one. On the 10th evening, he sat sadly against a wall. The cockroach god hadn't come back. He thought life as a cockroach would be easier, but it was much worse. He had even thought about ending his life. But he was a cockroach now. He couldn't drown, and falling from a height wouldn't kill him either. The only option would be to find a natural enemy and get eaten. He trembled with fear at the thought. Maybe it was better to stay alive. He remembered that cockroaches were social insects. If he could become their leader, the cockroach king, his chances of surviving would go up. Even without a god, his human brain could help him live a better life. He woke up a cockroach next to him and said, "You have a strong body. Want to be friends?" The cockroach turned away, upset, and said, "Leave me alone. You don't even eat hot poop." Zhou Yi realized then that no matter how comfortable he made his life, he wanted to rule over the cockroaches. The others seemed to think he had it easy. What he needed now was a chance to prove himself. On the 20th day after his transformation, that chance finally came. A few large cockroaches stood on a hill. One of them shouted that most of them would be moving to a new place with more food. If anyone stayed behind, they'd be eaten by enemies. One cockroach started crying, saying he couldn't eat poop anymore. Zhou Yi looked at him and thought he was the worst cockroach he had ever tried to teach. He didn't even search for food. He just waited for someone to bring him poop. The crying cockroach became even more upset, saying he was too scared to leave. Zhou Yi looked around and noticed that everyone looked scared. Were cockroaches really so attached to their home? One of the strong cockroaches yelled, asking for a volunteer to scout ahead. He said they had to stop hiding and speak up, but everyone just sat there, silent and shaking with fear. Zhou Yi stood silently, deep in thought. He didn't want to help this group. They didn't even eat the same kind of food as him. Suddenly, the system announced that the cockroach god was speaking. If Zhou Yi accepted this mission, the god might forgive him. Zhou Yi was shocked. He quickly raised his hand and shouted that he would lead the others. The cockroach next to him got excited and praised him, calling him brave. Zhou Yi smiled. He finally had a chance to show his abilities again. Later, the two of them were hiding in some bushes. Zhou Yi asked, "Is the mission to cross that fence?" "It looks calm. It should be easy." But the other cockroach looked scared and explained. Every time food ran out, the old cockroaches sent the young ones to explore. But the world was full of enemies, and most of them didn't come back. It was very dangerous. Zhou Yi was shocked and asked, "Is this a suicide mission? Was the cockroach god trying to kill him as punishment?" He turned around and said they should go back. He had another idea for how to find food. But then, an older cockroach appeared behind him. Zhou Yi hadn't noticed him. The elder asked, "Where are you going?" "Behind that fence are piles of monster corpses to eat. First come, first served. Zhou Yi was terrified. He thought, can cockroaches really eat alien monsters now? The young cockroach next to him was amazed. He said they'd never run out of food again. Zhou Yi, still shaken, said they could go ahead. He had just lost weight and didn't need dinner. But the elder grabbed him by the neck, lifted him up, and growled that if they didn't scout the area, they'd be the next meal. Zhou Yi started choking and thought, even as a cockroach, I can't escape survival of the fittest. He remembered his past. Back when he was human, his commander called their squad idiots, sent them out for food, and told them it was a reward on their path to survival. The elder cockroach then threw Zhou Yi down and shouted that the young ones should thank him for letting them live. He stepped on Zhou Yi's head. Zhou Yi, full of pain and frustration, realized that just being a cockroach who could eat anything wasn't enough. If he wanted to survive the apocalypse, he had to get stronger. So he stood up and walked with the other young cockroaches. Leading the way, he told them to stay focused, and if they saw danger, to alert everyone. One cockroach held onto his hand. Zhou Yi told him to let go, but the scared cockroach cried, saying he was afraid. Zhou Yi kept moving. He wondered about the strange fence, if there was no river nearby. How did these round stones get here? The older cockroaches watched from far away. One said they were halfway across and hadn't seen danger. They could go too. Another agreed, saying they shouldn't let the young ones get all the food. He flew off quickly and said loudly that if there were enemies, they'd attack the larvae first. Zhou Yi looked annoyed. They could fly, yet sent others to scout first. He shouted after them, but then heard something moving behind him. He turned and saw a frog staring at him. Panicked, he shouted that these weren't stones. They were toads, using camouflage to hide and ambush prey. The other cockroaches saw it too and started screaming in fear. The toads began to chase them. Zhou Yi yelled that they needed to fly away now. But even with their escape attempt, many cockroaches were caught and screamed in pain. Then the system activated. It scanned the toad. A mutant amphibian with powerful legs, able to jump 20 times its body length. Its tongue moved at 4 meters per second, covered in paralyzing slime and sharp teeth. But its weakness was that it couldn't see anything not moving. One scared cockroach froze and thought he was going to die. Zhou Yi told him not to move. Toads couldn't see still things. Just then, the cockroach god's messenger appeared again. The system gave Zhou Yi a choice. 1. Get a safe escape route and save himself. 2. Save the cockroach and gain his first loyal follower on the path to becoming Cockroach King. Zhou Yi thought seriously, how can I become a king if I'm dead? He was about to answer, but then heard crying. He looked back. The cockroach was staring at him, terrified. Zhou Yi remembered his past. How when he was left behind, he still hoped someone would come back for him. Even in the apocalypse, even at the edge of death, he had hoped. The god's messenger reminded him to decide quickly. The countdown was almost over. Zhou Yi didn't wait. He flew fast, thinking that he too had once wished to be saved. He grabbed the cockroach and said he'd eaten too much poop and needed to lose weight. The cockroach cried, but this time from joy. He said he loved Zhou Yi. Zhou Yi rolled his eyes and told him to shut up. His breath smelled horrible. Then, suddenly, a giant toad leapt toward them. Zhou Yi threw the other cockroach away at the last second, saving him. But Zhou Yi himself was swallowed. Inside the toad's mouth, he tried to escape but couldn't. The system said he had passed the cockroach god's test. His bravery and sacrifice had earned back the god's favor. The system was reactivated. He got a new power. Devour all things. He also gained a sticky tongue and acidic slime. With his new power, he exploded the toad's head from inside. The system then announced he had earned a special reward. A body transformation. Thanks to it, Zhou Yi finally took on human form once more. Zhou Yi was very happy and shouted, "I'm back!" A messenger of the cockroach god appeared beside him, called him by name, and said that even in a tough moment, he had kept kindness and justice in his heart. He was worthy of being the god's follower. Zhou Yi was surprised and asked, frowning, "Wait, does this mean I have to become a cockroach again?" The messenger smiled a little and said that cockroaches may still be cockroaches, but they could be considered immortal. Since he now had immortality, Did looks really matter? Zhou Yi called him boss and asked if he had problems in language class. Couldn't he speak more clearly? This angered the messenger, who shouted that Zhou Yi was an idiot. He already had immortality in human form. Once Zhou Yi realized this, he was overjoyed. He said loudly that now he didn't need to become a cockroach again. He smiled, saying it was a relief that the god hadn't abandoned his friend just because he was an insect. Just then, he stepped on something. He looked down, worried, laughed awkwardly, and said, "Oops, did I just step on something?" He lifted his foot and saw that he had crushed the very cockroach he had saved earlier. The cockroach god's messenger shouted in anger, saying he had killed his own partner after just saving him. Zhou Yi panicked. He wondered if turning back into a human had caused this. He had saved him once. Would the system really punish him now for stepping on him? His survival might now depend on how well he could act. The messenger was furious. He yelled, "How could I have chosen such a blind fool?" Then, Zhou Yi suddenly began to cry loudly. He picked up the crushed cockroach and screamed in sorrow. He begged the god not to leave him alone, saying he had raised his friend so carefully, only to kill him himself. Was this some kind of cruel joke? He cried that he couldn't live without him and wanted to die too. The cockroach god's messenger looked at him and began to believe in his sadness. He thought, these two were truly close. Maybe I was wrong about him. He floated down and told Zhou Yi to stop crying. The cockroach wasn't dead, or rather, as long as Zhou Yi stayed alive, he could always be revived. He just needed to kill mutant monsters to collect energy to bring him back. Zhou Yi smiled. This world suddenly felt so small. The toads that attacked him, they wouldn't get away with it. He said he'd make sure the toads remembered this day, the day they felt the fear of humans. But before he could move, a toad leapt toward him and smacked him in the face. The monster had rushed him at high speed. Zhou Yi caught the toad and asked loudly, "Do you really think you can beat me, a giant?" The cockroach god's messenger warned him, "Don't touch these mutated toads. Their saliva is corrosive." Zhou Yi suddenly saw burns on his hands and screamed in pain. The toad looked at him and mistook him for a hairy caterpillar. Then, it shot its tongue between his legs. He screamed in agony, pulled the toad off, and turned away sadly. "I can't even beat a mutant toad," he muttered. The messenger explained that the toad was using its powers to fight, but Zhou Yi wasn't using his. He lifted the toad and shouted that he had given Zhou Yi the ability to devour anything. He had to eat monsters to gain powers and antibodies. The more he consumed, the stronger he would get. That's how he could become a god. Zhou Yi hesitated and asked if he could at least fry it first. The messenger shoved the toad toward him and told him to just swallow it. Didn't he want power? But the moment the toad touched his tongue, his taste buds exploded in his brain. It was so disgusting he threw up. He cried out that he couldn't eat it. The messenger pointed to the floor and yelled, if he didn't do it, he would die. Zhou Yi looked around and saw he was now surrounded by mutant toads. They jumped at him all at once, and he started screaming. He began to cry, wondering how it had come to this. After everything he'd been through, he couldn't even take one bite. He finally gritted his teeth, grabbed a toad, and ate it. The system activated. Devour all things was working. It detected new biological traits, acidic slime, frog jump, and muscle stretch. Zhou Yi looked at the toads and said their powers no longer worked on him. Now it was his turn to fight. He started attacking and defeating the toads. In fact, he was winning so easily, he started to feel a little bored. Suddenly, he saw a bright light ahead. There were trucks parked there. A man saw him and called someone on the radio. He said, "Commander! I've found a completely naked man doing weird things to toads. What should I do with him?" Zhou Yi looked up and shouted, "My comrades! Are you here to save me?" Zhou Yi thought it might be the extermination squad. In his past life, he had heard about them. The extermination squad was the strongest human force during the apocalypse. It was made up of the best awakened fighters. They battled monsters both on the ground and deep in the abyss, and they responded to new outbreaks in real time. They also kept law and order in the cities. He had heard that people living in cities protected by the extermination squad had lives that were almost normal again. Seeing them here could only mean one thing. But before he could think more, his smile vanished. He had just been hit with several darts. He collapsed to the ground. A few people stepped out of the truck. One of them said, "Target hit, ready to capture." But they were surprised when Zhou Yi stood up and told them to stop. The system explained that thanks to his muscle-stretching ability, he could fully control his muscles to dodge attacks. The darts fell from his body. One squad member pointed a gun at him and shouted that the target was dangerous. Everyone was told to prepare for battle. Zhou Yi got nervous. He shouted, saying he wasn't a criminal, and begged them to let him explain. They were just about to open fire, but then someone spoke up, and they stopped. A girl named Eileen sat on top of the truck and calmly said, "Take him alive." The squad agreed. Zhou Yi, looking frustrated, asked loudly if they had even heard what he was saying. Just then, several people on motorcycles rode up and began circling around him. Each one pulled out a lasso and threw it at him. The 5 riders took off in different directions, pulling him from all sides. Zhou Yi screamed in pain, but he held on tightly. The system alerted him that the acidic mucus ability was active. His skin now released a highly corrosive fluid, a trait from the mutant toad. Because of this, the ropes began to dissolve quickly, and he was soon free. Eileen smiled and asked, "So, he's awakened too?" Zhou Yi started running away fast. The squad chased after him. One of them shouted that they couldn't let him escape. One member caught up and tried to grab him. But thanks to the slime, Zhou Yi slipped right out. The squad member noticed his gloves melting and muttered that this was getting interesting. Then he suddenly lunged at Zhou Yi at high speed. But Zhou Yi dodged and kept running. Another squad member jumped in with a weapon swing, but Zhou Yi slid on his knees under the attack and dodged it too. He then activated his frog jump ability and leapt a huge distance in one jump. As he ran, he laughed and asked if they still thought they could catch him. But suddenly, he tripped and fell. He looked down. His leg was tangled in several threads. Eileen looked at him, smiling, and asked, "Did you really think you could run away from me?" Eileen pulled the threads connected to Zhou Yi and dragged him closer. Then she released more strings from her fingers, completely tying up his body. She jumped forward, stepped on his head, and asked, "Which number is this?" A squad member replied, "The 13th. She got onto her motorcycle, where the strings were tied, and rode along with the rest of the team. After some time, they arrived at the city base. Eileen called out that Vice Captain Eileen had returned and ordered the Redbird gate to be opened. As the gate opened, she rode inside and warned them not to open it too wide, or monsters might sneak in. Zhou Yi, still tied up, was dragged behind her as she entered. They stopped, and she took him to the extermination squad prison. There, they dressed him and put shackles on his wrists. Zhou Yi looked frightened and said, "I'm really harmless. Why is it the end of the world, but being naked is still not allowed?" A girl walking beside him asked, "Is this one also able to talk?" Another replied, "He's different from the other 12. Eileen looked serious. She explained that within a week, 12 mysterious people had been found. They were all naked, couldn't speak, and only laughed weirdly. Even though tests confirmed they were human, something about them felt off, almost like they weren't human at all. One of the girls asked, "Why not just kill them? Why go through so much trouble?" Another girl replied, "If we kill people just because they're dumb or ugly, how are we different from the monsters outside? Stop complaining. The genetic test results will be ready tomorrow." Zhou Yi thought to himself, "So I was arrested because I look like those weirdos? But wait, what's this genetic test? Will it expose me?" Just then, a system window popped up. The cockroach god's representative appeared and asked, "What is genetic analysis?" They walked into a large hall. One of the girls said, "No matter who he is, he has to stay here tonight." But then she noticed something. Why is it so dark in here? And where is everyone else? Another girl was shocked and asked, "Where did all the other prisoners go?" They looked around carefully. When they looked up, they were all stunned. Every prisoner was floating in the air, their heads huge and swollen. Zhou Yi stared in horror, completely speechless. One of the prisoners, sitting with a big creepy smile, looked right at them. Then his head began to explode. The head completely exploded, and a monster came out. Everyone nearby turned around in shock. In the next moment, the monster sent out its tentacles toward the people. It grabbed the main character and others, lifting them into the air. The tentacles then moved toward Eileen. She quickly got into a stance, ready to jump. At the last second, she managed to dodge. She pushed off the ground and leapt into the air, then shouted, "So this is its real form!" A worker caught in the tentacles stared in fear. Her body started to get covered in spores. She grabbed her face and screamed loudly. The protagonist was shocked, confused about what was happening. He was also being covered in spores. At that moment, a representative of the cockroach god appeared next to him and explained that he was now infected. He had to eat the spores quickly or he would turn into a zombie. The monster turned to Eileen and shouted that it wanted her body. Surprised, she thought, "It can talk? How interesting. I've never seen this before." Then the monster swung its tentacles again, grabbing people in all directions. Eileen shot out a web, grabbed it, and used it to lift herself into the air. She jumped over the people being attacked. She thought to herself that dealing with parasitic monsters was tricky. You couldn't just rush in and hit them. She also didn't have any magic crystals with her, and it was almost impossible to use her abilities now. Then her eyes landed on some surgical tools. She used her power to grab one and threw it forward, thinking, nothing is impossible. The monster moved its tentacles again, putting 2 workers in front of itself. Eileen quickly pulled the scalpel back just in time. The monster shouted, "Weak humans!" At this point, the main character yelled that he didn't have time to eat the spores, because the monster would appear again. The cockroach god shouted back angrily, telling him to stop whining and just swallow it. So, the protagonist ate the spores, and the system told him that he had gained resistance to parasites. It was evolving. When the progress reached 45%, Eileen looked at the monster and asked, "Is he mocking himself? He's just a coward hiding behind hostages." She pointed several scalpels at the monster. He told her it wouldn't work. She smirked. Using her web, she moved around the hostages and aimed a scalpel straight at the monster. It hit his body, and he screamed in surprise. Eileen thought, "I knew it. His body is weak. That's why he hides inside others for safety." Suddenly, blood burst from the bodies of the hostages. Eileen was confused. The monster said she had hurt him, and the damage spread to the hostages. A moment later, the scalpel popped out of his body, and the wounds healed. Eileen thought, "What a troublesome ability." Then the monster pointed at her and said she was infected too. She looked at her hand and was shocked to see spores on it. Her hand moved toward her neck, and she realized she couldn't control it. She gasped for air, trying to scream as her own hand started to choke her. The monster said, "He won't give her a chance to clean the spores." The monster was shocked when Eileen's hand suddenly let go of her neck. She stood up and shot out a web, saying it was lucky she could catch herself too. The monster might have infected others, but her web wasn't just for controlling enemies. It worked on herself as well. Webs kept coming from her fingers as she stretched them forward, pointing the scalpels at the monster. She said, "Too bad for him that it ended like this." The monster agreed, but warned her that using this power too many times would make her lose a lot of blood. Eventually, she wouldn't be able to fight, and if she tried to run, he'd kill the hostages and escape. He pushed the hostages forward. Eileen replied, he could beg her to let him go, even cry on his knees, and she still wouldn't leave. Meanwhile, the main character kept struggling to break free. The monster looked at him, confused. Why can't I control him? It wondered. Then it decided to kill him. A new tentacle flew straight toward the protagonist. He screamed in fear, knowing he couldn't dodge. He thought it was the end. But the next second, his body was wrapped in webbing, and Eileen pulled him to her. He flew down while screaming, then hit the ground. He opened one eye and thanked her for saving him. Embarrassed, his face turned red as he repeated his thanks. She looked at him without replying, then picked him up by his clothes and asked, "So he wasn't working with the monster? He was just a pitiful pervert from the start?" He cried out, saying he had already explained everything on the way here, but she hadn't believed him. She said that since the monsters couldn't infect him, she had thought of two possible outcomes. Either they would die together here, or she would fight the monster while he went to get help. The protagonist looked at her in surprise, then declared he had a third plan. She raised an eyebrow. What third plan? He slammed his fist into his palm and shouted they should work together and beat up this disgusting, mushroom-looking monster. She asked why he was so eager to die. He replied that the thing he hated most about people was when they let fear make them abandon their teammates. In his eyes, people who left their friends behind were worse than monsters. Eileen crossed her arms, surprised at how brave the young man was. She wondered if he had a problem with his brain. At that moment, the protagonist remembered what the system had told him. The monster was actually weak, and now that he had resistance to parasites, he didn't need to fear its attacks. With that ability, he could live and work safely under the protection of the extermination squad. Suddenly the monster shouted, swinging its arms. Humans, even when fighting, only care about impressing the opposite gender. Stupid minds like that deserve to die. Then it released a bunch of tentacles, and several flew toward both the protagonist and Eileen. At this point, the main character turned to Eileen and asked, "She can control bodies, right? So can she control him in battle? He's not scared of parasites, but he's terrible at fighting." She raised her hands and aimed her web, replying, "Well, he should know. I can't promise he'll stay safe." Her web stuck to the protagonist's body, and she shouted, "Go!" He charged straight at the monster. The monster said he wouldn't be able to dodge the tentacles. Then it pushed the hostages forward and asked, "How's he going to get past my puppets?" When the protagonist got close to one of the hostages, Eileen pulled the web and made him leap upward. He pushed off the hostage's back and flew forward. But another hostage blocked his way. Eileen quickly did the same thing again, this time guiding him downward. He flew between the hostage's legs and kept going. He pushed off the ground with his hand and ran straight toward the monster while shouting, "Let's go!" The monster yelled, "He's getting faster! Is she controlling him?" Eileen thought, wow, how clever. Just then, the protagonist swung his fist and shouted that the monster had to die. The monster replied that he was too weak and wouldn't break through his defenses. It blocked the attack using its tentacles, but the protagonist activated his muscle-stretching ability. His arm grew stronger. He also used acid slime. With all that power, he broke through the tentacle barrier and hit the monster. The monster screamed in pain as acid spread over its body. Eileen was surprised and thought, does he have hidden powers? The monster's body started to melt from the acid as it screamed, "This can't be! Such power!" The protagonist stepped back, but the monster thought it wasn't over yet. It believed it could still survive. Its body could take the damage. Then it suddenly looked down at itself in shock and shouted, "Why is the wound still there?" A huge hole was in its body. At that moment, Eileen gently laid the hostages down. Holding the spores in her hand, she said softly, "Forgive me, but I already took out your parasitic spores." She crushed them in her hands and giggled, saying she really liked the way it looked. Then she smeared it. The monster clenched its teeth. The next second, the huge head started shaking violently, then exploded, releasing a huge wave of blood. The protagonist and Eileen looked up in confusion. Then the MC looked back down at the monster and realized it was absorbing the blood. The monster's body began to change. It was transforming into a new form. The monster's body was full of huge muscles, and it let out a loud roar as it stood up. Then the monster said they were the first ones to see him like this, and he hoped they wouldn't let him down. After that, he aimed a punch straight at Eileen's face. She was shocked. So fast! In the next moment, she flew back and slammed into the wall behind her. The main character turned around, surprised. She thought, so strong. His power level is way higher. Then, to her horror, she saw the monster's hand coming at her. He grabbed her head and smashed it into the wall. He kept going, leaving a deep mark, then tossed her aside. Eileen hit the ground and spit out blood. The monster stood beside her and said, "He just got hit." Then he turned and looked at the protagonist. He said it was his turn. MC thought, this is bad. The monster ran at him and landed a strong hit. MC flew back, coughing up blood, and hit the ground awkwardly. The system warned of danger. His bones were broken, and his organs badly hurt. It said he had taken fatal damage. The immortality skill kicked in. His body started healing and fixing itself. The next moment, the protagonist opened his eyes. His body lifted off the ground. He screamed, "I'm going to die!" Right then, a messenger of the cockroach god appeared and told him not to move. He said he couldn't promise recovery if he got hurt again. Then MC dropped to the ground and thought he should pretend to be dead. "She has to win. Please hold on, my friend." The monster looked at him and smiled. "So weak," he said. Then Eileen landed a kick to the back of his head. She had jumped off the ground, but the monster caught her leg. She thought in shock, "How can this happen?" Then he started slamming her body on the ground by her leg, swinging her from side to side. He then threw her up into the ceiling. After that, he picked up the broken part of a machine and saw it was what they used to chain him up. He held it above his head and got ready to throw it. Eileen was falling at the same time and yelled that it was so clumsy. The monster then threw the device forward again. Eileen slid down the wall, her legs covered in blood. She thought, "They're broken. Okay, I can still move my arm." MC was lying on his stomach. He raised his head and looked at the monster. He thought, "Even the vice captain of the extermination squad can't beat it. So, who can save us?" At that moment, the hostage spoke to him. She reached out her hand and told him to give this to Vice Captain Eileen. She said it would unlock her power. In her hand was a glowing crystal. The protagonist looked at the crystal quietly, then reached out and took it. He thought, "But how can I get this to her?" Just then, the cockroach beside him shouted, "If you use the muscle-stretching skill to reach her, there's a small chance it'll work." According to the cockroach's math, the success chance was only 10%. The protagonist was shocked. "Just 10%? That's the best?" The cockroach replied, "You have a 10% chance to live, or a 100% chance to die. You choose." Clenching his teeth, MC stood up and thought, "Forget it. I'll go all in." He used the muscle-stretching skill, let out a loud scream, and dashed forward. The monster looked surprised. The cockroach noted the monster reacted quicker than expected. The success chance dropped to 5%. Still running, MC thought he had to try. He pushed off the floor and jumped over the monster's head. The cockroach added, "Now it's only 1%. While flying forward, MC smiled, thinking he made it. But the next second, the monster caught his leg and asked, "What are you doing?" MC looked down, confused. The cockroach said, "Now it's 0%. The monster slammed MC into the ground hard. Then he lifted his leg to crush his head. MC thought, "Who says I won't make it? This is my last chance." He threw the crystal ahead and yelled, "She has to catch it." The monster stomped on it with full force and laughed, "Weakling!" But then he noticed something strange. There were layers of spider webs under his foot. Surprised, he asked, "Webs? That woman?" Eileen had healed herself using her power. She said, "He risked his life to give me the crystal. I'm really moved." She was floating, covered in webs. Then she stretched her arm forward and wrapped more web around the monster. Pulling her hand back, she yanked him down and grabbed her spider sword. She pulled him close and shouted, "Monster, go to hell!" She attacked with her sword, but then looked surprised. The monster grabbed her sword and said, "Even with your powers, humans are still too weak." He squeezed it. The sword cracked. Then he completely broke it in half. He grabbed Eileen by the neck and lifted her. Then he made a long spike from his hand and stabbed it through her body. At that moment, MC hugged himself and looked at the scene, thinking, "This time, it's really the end." The monster made another sharp spike with his hand and yelled, "She must die." But suddenly, his hands were cut off, and he screamed in shock. When he turned around, he saw Captain Philo from the 2nd Division of the Extermination Squad flying in. He was holding Eileen in his arms. The monster asked, confused, "Who are they?" Commander Haley from the 10th Division knelt near the hostages. She placed her hand on one's chest and saw that things were bad. Bones and organs were crushed. She had to start healing right away. A green crystal appeared in her hand. Philo told her not to worry. No monster would get past him to hurt her. Corey Virion, the division commander, cracked his joints and walked forward. He said he was probably going to enjoy dealing with this strange monster. He can even talk. Eileen turned to Corey and said this monster was not normal. She told him to be careful. Corey turned to her, smiled, and gave a thumbs up. He said she didn't need to worry. He's not weak either. Haley was annoyed. She shouted that both of them should be quiet. She needed full focus. She then started to gather energy around the crystal between her hands and used a rune to heal. A sprout came from the ground and quickly grew into a big flower. Inside, it was a hostage. Then she did the same with the second hostage. Philo placed Eileen in the third flower. The protagonist was surprised when he found himself inside one of the flowers. He thought, flowers? Then he relaxed inside the bud and thought, so warm, like a hot spring. He turned to his side, but just then, the cockroach told him not to pass out. He threw a shot of adrenaline straight into MC's shoulder. MC screamed, "It hurts!" Haley was shocked. It's not supposed to hurt, she thought. Then the cockroach said, he's lucky. He should open his eyes and watch the world's strongest fighting force. Corey walked ahead, pointed at himself, and introduced himself. He added, since this monster understands human language, why don't we talk? The monster replied, I won't talk to food. Then Corey looked at the wall in shock. Blood suddenly poured out from the tiles. The monster screamed, saying he had already absorbed all of his past versions. He shouted, you will all die here. And suddenly, monsters began rushing toward them. Zhou Yi screamed in fear. There were monsters everywhere, above, below, right, and left. Philo quickly raised his fist, leaving glowing mana in the air. Then he dropped his hand, sending out strong winds. The monster's blood splashed away, and he shouted in pain. The main character sitting on a flower gasped and said, that wind, it's a wind barrier. The monsters stared at the swirling wind, shocked to see their friend's blood flying in it. Philo turned to Haley and said he could hold the monsters back, but she'd still have to put up with the awful smell of blood. Haley replied seriously, saying she forgave him. The main character thought in awe that her strength was really something. One of the monsters saw the commander holding up well and said he'd take her down first. He started absorbing the blood around him and laughed. Suddenly, he grew bigger and let out a loud roar. The main character shouted in shock, 3 forms? That's not fair at all. Corey looked at the monster and said he was jealous. This monster could grow bigger whenever he wanted, while Corey had to warm up first. The monster punched fast, but Corey dodged it just in time. He said it was too bad. The monster almost got him. The monster growled and threw another punch. Corey jumped into the air. The second hit came quickly, but Corey blocked it. He reached out fast, but then jumped back again. The monster growled that Corey was just hiding like a bug. Suddenly, Corey saw blood claws coming up. Blood tentacles wrapped around him as the monster yelled, saying Corey was finished. But Corey pulled out his sword with confidence and slashed many times. He landed on the ground, surrounded by pieces of the monster's body. The enemy asked in shock, what just happened? Then Corey touched his face and flicked it with a finger. Right away, the monster exploded into pieces and shrank back into its small form. Its bits flew through the air. Corey calmly waved his hand, caught the monster in a flask, and laughed. He held it up and shouted happily that he caught it. He was the first to catch a talking monster. Does that mean I get to name it? Haley yelled angrily. Is this a game to you? You should be thinking about how to explain to the council why the research lab's new mission was ruined. All the others called Corey an idiot at the same time. Zhou Yi looked in amazement at their power. The cockroach asked if Zhou Yi could see the difference now. Then it added that it was okay for the main character to faint. Sometime later, in the apartment, Zhou Yi opened his eyes and thought, where am I? He looked up, shocked, and yelled, why am I in a bathtub? Then he noticed something, a woman's shape behind the shower curtain. His face turned red with embarrassment, and he thought, what is going on? Suddenly, Eileen peeked from behind the curtain and asked if he had finally woken up. She said the genetic test results weren't ready yet, so he'd need to stay locked up for another night. But since the prison was destroyed, she had no choice but to keep him at her place. Zhou Yi stuttered, embarrassed. Did they really have to be locked up together, both wet and naked? Eileen crossed her arms and firmly said he should stop being so shy. This was the only time they could take a hot shower since hot water was only available now. How else were they supposed to wash, if not together? She introduced herself as the vice captain of the first unit of the extermination squad and thanked him for his help. Then she asked for his name. Blushing, Zhou Yi asked for a moment to think, and then gave his name. Eileen put her foot into the bathtub and asked him to move over. Zhou Yi turned his head away, feeling awkward. She pointed at him and told him to turn around and sit next to her so she could check his injury. The main character turned around, and Eileen placed her hand on his back. He smiled nervously, thinking she really didn't understand personal space. Eileen suddenly asked in surprise how this was possible. His wounds had completely healed. Not even scars were left. She hit his back gently and said he definitely had great potential. The assistant shouted that his heart rate had gone up to 120. Male hormones were high, and blood was rushing to the lower part of his body. Should Zhou Yi prepare for breeding mode? Zhou Yi yelled angrily that it wasn't necessary. Eileen seriously pointed to herself and said he should look at the wound on her chest. That monster had been really brutal. Even though she was treated, a scar was still there. If he didn't believe her, he could see it for himself. Zhou Yi looked at her, very embarrassed. Just then, the cockroach popped up and said breeding mode was starting, and the countdown began. The main character quickly got out of the bath and ran from the room, shouting that he was in a hurry and she could finish washing alone. Eileen sat there, confused. Meanwhile, Zhou Yi leaned against the door, breathing hard. He shouted that if he had stayed one more second, his reputation would have been ruined. What kind of system interference was this? The TV host announced that strong energy waves had been detected near Minghai City, about 50 kilometers away. Some members of the unofficial public security team were attacked. Zhou Yi looked at the TV in shock. He used to live there. Did everyone die? The host added that it happened suddenly. When the extermination squad got there after the distress call, no one had survived. The main character was stunned. If he hadn't left, he'd be dead now too. The host reminded viewers again that the abyss was a gateway to another world. Anyone with clues should contact the right people. Suddenly, the cockroach showed up and told Zhou Yi to stop thinking so much. There weren't many of them left in the world. The assistant said he had good news. Zhou Yi's friend, the Imperial Guard he had stepped on, had recovered. Zhou Yi looked at the system window in surprise. The assistant raised a finger and said from now on, Fatty would be immortal. No matter how many times he fell, he'd come back, as long as Zhou Yi could heal. Zhou Yi thought it sounded pretty cool, but asked how a little cockroach, even one that revives, could protect him. The assistant crossed his arms and said Fatty could evolve. For now, he could share his vision with Zhou Yi. Zhou Yi clicked the system to summon Fatty. Fatty appeared right away, yelling with joy that he missed his brother. Zhou Yi looked at him proudly. Fatty said Zhou Yi wasn't that good looking though. The assistant told Zhou Yi to order Fatty to fly somewhere, then close his eyes so their vision could sync. Fatty flew fast through a crack in the door and hovered over Eileen in the bath. Zhou Yi shouted angrily, "Where was Fatty going?" He ordered him to leave. Fatty turned and said he just felt Zhou Yi wanted to peek. Suddenly, Eileen raised her hand and sent a mana blast catching Fatty. The mana spread out and Fatty started to melt. Zhou Yi panicked and threw his head back, his nose gushed with blood. The assistant explained he forgot to mention, when Fatty dies, Zhou Yi also feels the pain. The next day, the test results landed on the table. Eileen crossed her arms and said everything looked good. Zhou Yi checked the papers. Eileen smiled and said he was now free. Zhou Yi calmly put the papers down and suddenly said he wanted to join the extermination squad. Eileen frowned and said their death rate was very high. Zhou Yi asked, "Isn't the death rate for regular people just as high?" "After all, I'm awakened too." He had fought alongside her and his tests were clean. He placed a hand on his chest and asked again, "Could he join?" Eileen crossed her arms and said the extermination squad only held tryouts once every 4 years, and it was in a week. While his level was okay, this year's exam was said to be the toughest. Zhou Yi paused and asked if maybe the vice captain could help him somehow. He didn't believe she was so heartless she wouldn't repay the favor of saving her life. Eileen lowered her head darkly. then stood from her chair. She smiled and said she liked his stubborn and bold spirit. She would give him a chance for special training. At the same time, Corey stood by a wall. Zhong asked why the commander had asked him to fake Zhou Yi's test results, since they showed he wasn't fully human. Corey firmly told him to keep it a secret for now. Sometime later, at the training base near the abyss entrance, Zhou Yi looked at it in fear and shouted, "What does this mean? Is the special training Eileen mentioned just throwing me straight into the abyss?" He thought to himself, this has to be a joke. The abyss is full of monsters that are way stronger than the ones outside. People say that even if you send a whole army into the abyss, the death risk is still high. How is he supposed to improve inside there? And all he has are 4 teenage teammates: Justin, Lu Yao, Su Kai, and Song Tao. Eileen raised a finger and explained that during the cataclysm, bugs dug deep tunnels inside the abyss. Each abyss connects to a parallel world. Depending on how much destruction happened there, abysses are ranked in 6 levels of danger, from E to S. The higher the level, the stronger the monsters and the bigger the area. She pointed at the portal and said they'd go through it to reach an abyss already explored by the extermination squad. She quickly hit the control panel and said the squad's job is to go into the abyss, kill monsters, and delay another world from invading theirs. By killing monsters, their weapons absorbed the power from magical crystals, helping them grow stronger. She crossed her arms and said the portal was now open. She announced that Justin had already been to the abyss before, so he'd lead the team. He confidently shouted that he understood. After training for a while, they arrived at the silent jungle, an abyss of danger level E. The team stood among giant trees. Zhou Yi looked around in surprise. So, this is the abyss? Suddenly, a monkey appeared on a branch. Zhou Yi noticed its tail looked like a snake and shouted in shock. Then turning his head, he yelled again, this time at the sight of a giant spider. Looking up in amazement, he said the tree was incredibly tall. "Are we still on Earth? We just walked through a door, but it feels like another world." Later, the team walked through the forest. Justin turned and threw a bag at Zhou Yi, ordering him not to even think about touching the monsters. His only job was to follow and carry their stuff. Zhou Yi was surprised, but Justin thought angrily, "This loser spent last night with instructor Eileen. How dare he get near my goddess?" Zhou Yi lowered his head silently. Justin growled, asking if Zhou Yi was refusing. Zhou Yi raised a thumb with a smile and shouted that he'd never touch a monster. He'd do a great job as the team's carrier. Justin was confused. Zhou Yi thought happily that he was safe now. Justin muttered, "This guy doesn't seem that smart." Zhou Yi raised his hand and cheerfully asked the others to give him their things. He reached toward Lu Yao and offered to carry her bag. She seriously said no. Zhou Yi thought he seemed like a pretty normal person. He still didn't get why he wasn't allowed to hunt monsters, but whatever. At least he could watch how awakened people fight in the abyss. Soon, Lu Yao covered her staff in lightning and used the skill Wrath of Heaven and Thunder. Bright bolts hit the monkeys. Justin slashed at monsters and shouted that they would all die for him. Zhou Yi, hiding behind rocks, watched in awe. He thought their crystal weapons seemed to absorb the monsters' power when they died. It was just like gaining XP in games. The more monsters they killed, the stronger they got. An hour later, Zhou Yi noticed that even the best awakened warriors looked worn out after hunting. Justin finally lowered his sword and said he had killed 310 monsters and leveled up. Zhou Yi watched and thought how different they were. Sitting by the fire on a rock, he tucked a napkin into his shirt and began cutting meat. He happily chewed as the system window popped up. Skill acquired, Snake Monkey's long arm. Zhou Yi thought, so I only need to eat a piece of the monster to get its power? I don't even have to kill it myself? He kept eating the meat. The system popped up again. Poison resistance gained. Poison resistance improved. Jungle adaptation gained and improved. Daylight tolerance gained. Later, Zhou Yi laid on the ground, hand on his full belly, and let out a loud burp. He smiled and thought he had made up his mind. Even if he joined the extermination squad, he'd stay in logistics. Watching others work hard while he got stronger by eating. What a perfect plan. Suddenly, the cockroach assistant appeared and told him to pray to the cockroach god. Zhou Yi raised his hands joyfully and shouted, "Long live the cockroach god!" Meanwhile, the others stood near a monster's corpse and looked toward the fire. Annoyed, they wondered aloud, "What is that guy doing? We worked so hard to kill those monsters, and he's having a feast all by himself." After a while, purple smoke rose in the quiet jungle. The horned jungle monster walked fiercely, stirring up dust with every step. The king of the snake-tailed monkeys roared in anger when he saw the horned monster. Suddenly, the horned monster attacked, throwing the monkey king high into the air. Zhou Yi, hiding behind the rocks, watched everything and whispered with awe, "This must be the final battle of the abyss." He was shocked at how easily the horned monster defeated the monkey king, even though their strength was only slightly different. Justin confidently said they could win as long as everyone followed his plan. He claimed their rookie team could beat the boss. The main character, MC, looked at him tensely, remembering the past. Eileen had seriously warned them before. If they broke the rules and attacked the boss, any injuries, disabilities, or deaths wouldn't be covered by health insurance. Snapping out of the memory, the MC asked, "Didn't Eileen say we shouldn't fight the boss?" "I'm not doing this." Justin angrily grabbed Joe's shirt and shouted that the protagonist didn't need to worry. He just had to go to the safe zone and watch their stuff. Lu Yao stood by, watching everything seriously. Justin pointed to a mark on the paper map and told Zhou Yi to just stay in that spot. He asked if the MC had figured out what was really going on. The MC, holding the bags, quietly walked away and wished them good luck. The rest of the team smiled cruelly and laughed to themselves. Lu Yao turned to Justin and asked if the place where he sent Zhou Yi was the same spot where they had planned the final boss ambush. Justin darkly confirmed it was. He had filled the bags Zhou Yi carried with explosives. He planned for the MC to attract the boss, then set off the explosion. Raising his arms in excitement, he said they would deal with the injured boss afterward. Sacrificing the MC, he said, was a small price to pay. Lu Yao shouted angrily that this was wrong. Suddenly, Justin pointed a sword at her neck. Her teammates called out in shock. Justin coldly told her to stop acting like she cared. He would only let her act this way once. Meanwhile, in the safe zone, Zhou Yi knelt beside the dead monster and lifted its paw. Suddenly, the ground began to shake. Zhou Yi looked up, worried. "Is the fight really this intense?" he asked. The tremors reached even the safe zone. Then Zhou Yi spotted something coming through the trees. Monkeys flew overhead. Are they running away? He wondered. Suddenly, a tree snapped. The horned monster charged at him. It hit Zhou Yi hard, knocking him down and making him cough blood. The monster didn't stop. It kept running, breaking trees in its path. It rammed Zhou Yi into a rock, sending smoke everywhere. Grabbing the monster's horn, Zhou Yi thought, "Why is it here?" Suddenly, the assistance system appeared and warned, "Severe damage detected. Foreign object must be removed for healing." Coughing hard, Zhou Yi shouted, "Where are my teammates? Have they all been beaten?" Just then, a flaming arrow landed near the bags. Zhou Yi realized, that's an incendiary arrow. And there are explosives in those bags. A massive explosion followed, and a bright flash filled the area. Zhou Yi thought bitterly, "Betrayed again. I've become bait once more." On the cliff, the team watched the explosion. Justin laughed and yelled, "Did you see that stupid look on his face? So funny!" He added that once the smoke cleared, they'd go down and finish the boss off. 2 wins in 1. Suddenly, Lu Yao gasped and told Justin to look again. Justin was shocked. The smoke cleared, and Zhou Yi was still alive. Zhou Yi, clutching the horn with a terrifying look, pulled it out of his body. The wound healed instantly. He gritted his teeth and shouted, "Did they really think I was that easy to use?" Suddenly, Zhou Yi lifted the horned monster by its horn. Justin stared in fear as Zhou Yi threw the monster into the air. The MC asked, "What did I do to deserve this? We just met, and you're already trying to hurt me." He tightly gripped the horned monster's horn. A system window appeared. Snake-tailed monkey's long arms activated. User can now lift weights hundreds of times heavier than normal. Jungle adaptation activated. User's abilities increase while in the jungle. Daylight tolerance activated. User's abilities increase during the day. At that moment, Zhou Yi threw the horned monster hard into a rock, creating a cloud of dust. Justin clenched his teeth and raised his hand to shield himself from the strong wind. Song Tao, lying under the monster, lifted his hand and begged the captain for help. The others looked at Song Tao and shouted his name. Justin gripped his sword handle in frustration and yelled that Song Tao was useless. He told everyone if they didn't want to die, they had to work together and defeat the monster. Song Tao reached for the captain's sword, pleading with him. But Justin shot an arrow that ripped through flesh. Song Tao's body swelled up instantly, and he screamed in pain, then exploded. The horned monster, now covered in wounds, roared and stood up in fury. Justin shouted to his team, asking what they were good for, and ordered them to fight. Sukai raised his flaming fist and screamed, shooting fire at the monster. Lu Yao attacked too, using streams of lightning. The monster cried out in pain. Justin laughed, saying the boss was weaker than people said. "How can a monster be strong?" he smirked. "If even a loser like Zhou Yi could throw it." Justin stared at the horned monster and told it to die. But suddenly the monster stood on its hind legs. Its horn glowed with fire and lightning. Lu Yao screamed, "This is bad! It absorbed all our attacks! You can't use elemental powers, it only makes it stronger!" Justin gritted his teeth in anger. "It's useless," he thought. "We can't beat it. It's way too strong." Everyone tensed up. Without warning, Justin attacked Sukai. Kai shouted in disbelief as he fell to the ground. Lu Yao stared at Justin in shock. He quickly struck her too. "Who said you could interfere with me?" Justin shouted. "I need to get rid of all of you before I die." He ran off, yelling they would thank him later. The horned monster lowered its face near the fallen team and roared. Then it crushed Sukai under its paw. Blood spilled on the ground. It raised its paw above Lu Yao. Just then, a bright light appeared. MC rushed in, carrying Lu Yao in his arms, and dodged the monster. She opened her eyes weakly and asked, Why did you only save me?" Zhou Yi calmly replied, "Because you were the only one who didn't bully me. You didn't make me carry the bags." He thought to himself, in his past life, his weakness made others treat him like bait. But that same weakness pushed him to grow stronger. He had to fight alone to survive the adult cockroaches. Now, he doesn't want to depend on anyone. In this world, only the strong can shape their fate. That's why he must become stronger. Suddenly, Justin reached out from the ground and begged Zhou Yi to save him. He was trapped under the monster's paw, shaking in fear. Zhou Yi calmly looked at him and said, "Don't worry about the monster." "Isn't that what you said?" Justin screamed in fear. But the horned monster stepped on him and ended his life instantly. A system window appeared. Sleeping pollen activated. Breathing in sleeping flower pollen can cause sleep. Lu Yao immediately fell asleep. MC gently laid her on the ground. He thought it was best to keep his monstrous powers a secret, for now. Looking at the monster, Zhou Yi realized they were the only two left. He gave a confident smile, placed one fist into his palm, and said, "Become my stepping stone on the road to true strength." The horned monster charged at the MC. In response, Zhou Yi stuck out his long tongue and wrapped it around a tree branch. A system window appeared. Elastic tongue activated. Using his tongue, Zhou Yi quickly swung up into the air, dodging the monster's attack. He pulled his tongue back and thought, "I've gathered so many abilities during this journey. Now it's time to use them." Another system message popped up. Mantis tip activated. Sharp mantis limbs can easily pierce enemies. MC jumped fearlessly onto the monster, aiming his mantis tip limb. As he landed, he realized the monster's shell was very hard, too tough to pierce easily, even with enhanced strength. Still, he noticed that the stomach area looked more vulnerable. Without hesitation, Zhou Yi drove the mantis tip into the monster's belly. The horned monster screamed in pain. MC smiled. It worked. But suddenly, the monster twisted and flung him away. Zhou Yi flew deep into the forest, leaving a trail of blood. He smashed into a rock, cracking it on impact. Coughing up blood, he thought, even though it's huge, the horned monster is still fast. Suddenly, lightning sparked from the monster's horn. It fired a blast of lightning toward him. Zhou Yi clenched his teeth in fear. This is bad. A huge lightning strike exploded, lighting up the entire area. It shot into the sky through the trees. Smoke rose near the broken trunks. The monster stared at Zhou Yi, who was now partly buried under wood. A system window appeared. Trent's skin activated. This wood-like skin gives good protection against electricity, but it's weak to fire. MC thought. Just like I guessed. Every powerful creature has a weakness, especially in its own habitat. Although his wooden skin helped defend against attacks, it still wasn't enough to defeat the monster with one strike. Looking at the horned monster, Zhou Yi felt he finally understood something. Another system message appeared. Snake-tailed monkey's long arm activated. Zhou Yi reached out and grabbed a sword lying on the ground. Holding it confidently, he thought, "This strike will decide everything." He pushed off the ground with force. Another system message appeared. Dryad vines activated. Treants use these vines to catch prey. In groups, they generate mana together and can trap any jungle creature. Thick vines shot out and wrapped around the horned monster, holding it tightly. The monster roared in rage. With a fierce look in his eyes, Zhou Yi leapt toward it, raising his weapon for a final blow. Suddenly, a powerful energy burst out, and the mythical creature broke free from its prison. It let out a loud, earth-shaking roar. Zhou Yi clenched his teeth. Could that beast really break out just by using brute strength? It was already too late to dodge. The system window appeared, saying, "Muscle stretching activated. Muscle strength increased." Zhou Yi swung his great sword at the creature's horn, but the weapon shattered. He jumped back, tossed the broken sword aside, and smiled. The monster rushed toward him. Zhou Yi said calmly, "Sorry, but you've already lost. I've gotten what I need to beat you." He devoured a piece of monster's sharp horn. The system reported a new trait unlocked. Sharp horn of the horned monster. New armor activation. Zhou Yi's body transformed. He was now covered in a detailed armor that gave him high agility. In his hands, he held large claw-like weapons, just like the horned creatures. He charged the monster at incredible speed, landing a powerful blow that brought the beast down. After the fight, Zhou Yi sat on the monster's body, breathing heavily. Suddenly, a golden key appeared next to him. The system window said, "Mysterious dungeon key. Used to enter the dungeon for a limited time." Zhou Yi stared at the key and asked, "What is this thing?" Elsewhere, the military reported an incident during training. 3 people were dead. One was badly injured and unconscious, and another had minor injuries. They urgently needed medical help. Later, in the hospital corridor, a soldier grabbed Zhou Yi by the shirt and shouted angrily, "Tell me everything. What happened in the abyss? Why weren't you hurt?" Zhou Yi thought, "Should I really say that I just got lucky and beat the boss? That sounds too unbelievable." Suddenly, Corey stepped in. He calmly put a hand on the soldier's shoulder and said, "Maybe you misheard. Why are you blaming the guy your own deputy recommended? By that logic, wasn't this whole thing your fault too?" The soldier panicked, shouting that he didn't mean it that way. He said it was just that all the reserve soldiers who died were selected by the military, and it wasn't avoidable. Corey looked at Zhou Yi, then turned back and said gently, "In the dungeon, death can't be avoided." Honestly, I didn't expect this either. Then he turned to Zhou Yi and said, "You're dismissed." Zhou Yi left, still looking uneasy. Later, on the hospital roof, Zhou Yi stood with his arms crossed, thinking, "Why did Corey defend me? Was it just because I was recommended by his deputy? But that didn't matter now. What mattered was the mysterious dungeon. What kind of place was it?" The cockroach assistant explained, "It's a hidden dungeon deep in the abyss. Only a key can open it. Normally humans would never find it. But since your DNA is similar to the monsters, the abyss likely saw your fight as a battle between monsters for leadership. That's why the key appeared." Zhou Yi was surprised. "So I'm the only one who can go in? And I can grow stronger there?" The cockroach nodded. "You're right. But the monsters in this dungeon are much stronger than the ones in regular abysses. You'll also face the monster that gave the horned beast that power. Maybe it's the same spore-type monster you met before. They're smart and know deep secrets of the abyss." Zhou Yi noticed a countdown timer and asked what it meant. The cockroach replied, "If the key isn't used within 24 hours, it will disappear." Zhou Yi looked at the key, stood up, and said, "Of course I'm going to the mysterious dungeon. But first, there's one thing I want to do. I might die in there after all." Later, Zhou Yi knelt down in front of Eileen and loudly shouted, "I'm asking you to go on a date with me!" Eileen kicked him in the jaw and yelled, "How dare you bother me like that? Don't ask like that again!" But Zhou Yi stood his ground and repeated, "I'm asking you to go on a date with me." She punched him hard in the face and began beating him up. After a moment, Eileen crossed her arms and said, "All right, try saying that again now." Zhou Yi, now more polite, replied, "I'm asking you to go on a date with me. I'll say it 1,000 times if I have to." Eileen looked at him. His eyes reminded her of soldiers who had made up their mind before going to die, those who wanted to fulfill one last wish. Suddenly, she laughed, holding her stomach, and smiled. "Well, you're pretty determined. All right, I agree." Later, Zhou Yi and Eileen had a great time. They sat at a restaurant, sharing a cocktail from the same glass. Then they went to the cinema to watch a horror movie. Zhou Yi held on to her in fear. They took a photo together, smiling. Then they went on a bike ride. Zhou Yi shouted joyfully, "This is my first date!" Finally, he smiled and said he had dreamed of this moment for almost 20 years. He had always imagined the perfect date. The only thing missing was the right girl. Now he had everything. "If I die now, I'll have no regrets," he said. Eileen called his name and said softly, "I've seen the faces of people who are about to die. Whether or not you fulfilled your wish, there's nothing better than staying alive." She admitted she didn't know what he had gone through in the dungeon or what he planned next, but he must never talk like that again. Only if you stay alive can you chase the life you truly want. Zhou Yi looked off into the distance. For a moment it was silent. Then he said, "Thank you." Eileen smiled and replied, "Next time, I hope you'll have the courage to ask me out again." Later that night, on the rooftop, the cockroach assistant said, "I didn't expect your only wish would be to go on a date." Zhou Yi didn't answer. He simply pulled out the golden key and opened the gate to the mysterious dungeon. As he stepped into the unknown, he thought, "This might be hard to explain, but a date was something I truly wanted in my last life." Then he walked through the gate and disappeared into the dungeon. Inside the mysterious dungeon, the dark chalice, Zhou Yi looked around and shouted, "I didn't expect this place to be so huge." The system window appeared and said, "Detected creature, giant snake-tailed ape, danger level, guardian." The monster let out a loud roar. Zhou Yi activated his powers. He thought, the old me would have run away. The system responded, "Sharp horn of the horned monster activated." Zhou Yi charged straight toward the giant ape's hand. Zhou Yi moved with lightning speed, landing several hits on the enemy. He appeared behind the monster and shouted, "You must die!" But suddenly another monster grabbed his leg. Zhou Yi realized, this is bad. The monster threw him hard into a tree. More monsters then appeared, teaming up to destroy him. Soon, the giant monster landed a powerful blow, severely wounding him. Zhou Yi quickly activated one of his abilities, and the system window appeared. Sleeping pollen activated. The monsters lost track of him. Zhou Yi recovered using the immortality skill. He thought grimly, these monkey monsters are just a little weaker than that horned one from the jungle. But there are too many of them. If I didn't have immortality, I'd be dead for sure. A direct fight was hopeless. If this mysterious dungeon is anything like the abyss, Zhou Yi thought, there must be stronger monsters here, natural enemies of these monkeys. If he could lead them into one of those traps, he might stand a chance. The system reported, frog jump activated. Zhou Yi began moving quietly through the trees. He still had hope. The monsters chased after him. After a while, one grabbed his leg again, but he broke free using acid slime. Looking forward, Zhou Yi thought, finally, I've found them. A system window appeared. Giant hunter spider detected. Danger level, guardian. Zhou Yi transformed into a white-tailed wood grouse and flew up to perch on a branch. He thought, as long as I'm disguised, they won't target me. Thankfully, his stats were boosted from absorbing earlier monster corpses. That was a huge help in moments like this. Then the real battle began. The massive spiders versus the monkey monsters. They fought brutally. The spiders trapped the monkeys in webs, then stabbed them with venom. One giant monkey roared in pain and collapsed. Foam poured from its mouth. MC watched as the hunter spiders finished off their enemies. Zhou Yi thought the snake-tailed monkeys had finally been beaten by their natural enemies. But normally, hunter spiders set traps to catch monkeys one at a time. Now a whole group of monkeys had invaded the spiders' territory. Suddenly, more giant monkeys showed up and charged at the spiders. The protagonist smiled. This was exactly the chaos he had hoped for. He used the skill Mantis Points and jumped down onto a monster's back. With quick slashes, he killed the spider, then took out the monkey. Zhou Yi noticed that spiders usually attack single targets. This might help balance the fight and keep the monsters attacking each other. The protagonist bit the creature's hand, thinking this would let him gain new abilities. But when he looked at his hand, nothing happened. Confused, he shouted, "Why didn't anything happen after I ate it?" The cockroach angrily snapped, "You idiot! The power I gave you doesn't work that way. You can't get strong monster traits just by eating them randomly. You have to eat specific body parts that control certain stats. I'll mark them for you." A system message appeared, saying the trait was in the biceps brachii. MC shouted, "Now I see it." Another system message came in. He had gained a new trait. His long arm of the snake-tailed monkey was now upgraded to the long arm of the giant snake-tailed monkey. Zhou Yi watched the monster battle, his face serious. Thanks to the chaos, he now had time to grow stronger. Soon, a system alert popped up. His endurance stat had increased. He also gained new traits: poisonous spider tail, paralyzing poison, and immunity to paralysis. The protagonist grinned. It was time for him to join the battle for real. Along the way, he quickly defeated several more enemies. As evening came, MC let out a deep breath and asked, "What's behind that door?" The cockroach answered, "That's the boss's territory, the final area of the mysterious dungeon." Zhou Yi felt a strong energy from behind the door. It was clearly dangerous. The protagonist took this seriously and asked, "What is that thing?" The cockroach replied, "That's the crystal of the mysterious dungeon. It only comes from a special monster graveyard in this dungeon. The crystal stores leftover supernatural power from monsters that died here over the years. It's a rare magic item. You can either absorb all its power, or use half of it to safely leave the dungeon." The protagonist stared at the crystal in his hand, thinking, "Could this let me escape now, or will it push me to risk everything again?" He made up his mind. "This is my best shot at becoming stronger," he said. "If I give up now, who knows when I'll get another chance to enter the mysterious dungeon? I've never even met a boss before. Am I really going to run away now?" After a while, inside the dungeon boss area, everything was on fire. A system message appeared. "Heavy-horned orc, danger level, unknown." Zhou Yi was shocked. He couldn't even tell its level, but the powerful aura was enough to know. This was definitely the boss of the mysterious dungeon. The orc looked at him and growled, "A human. Are you the one who killed my kin?" The protagonist froze. Another monster that could talk, and it mentioned its kin. Horned monsters from the abyss. Did these monsters have a society like humans? The dungeon boss stood up from his throne and charged, swinging a massive punch. The protagonist dodged just in time. That was strange, he thought, noticing a system message. Ability activated. Long arm of the giant snake-tailed monkey. The boss asked, "I haven't connected this place to my world yet. So how did a human get here?" MC was confused. "Wait, the boss can connect the dungeon to Earth?" The boss waved his hand, saying, "Forget it. I'll explain later myself." Then, he struck MC with a sharp blow. Zhou Yi coughed up blood as he was thrown into a rock wall. A system message popped up. Immortality ability activated. Damage recovery in progress. The orc watched, interested. You heal like one of my kind. Now this is getting interesting. I want to break you and study you. Gritting his teeth, MC activated dynamic vision. A system message read, Skill activated, improves tracking of high-speed movements. The boss moved in to attack again. Though his strength was terrifying, MC noticed something. His attacks were basic. If his moves are simple, he thought, then fighting up close might work in my favor. Zhou Yi charged, lifted his arm, and used the skill Acid Slime. He thought to himself, if only I could get his stats. But the heavy-horned orc smacked him back with a single blow. Is this the end? The protagonist thought weakly. The dungeon boss slammed his weapon into the ground and said, This thing's hard to use. I prefer using my fists anyway. Then he started punching MC with incredible speed and force. After a while, MC was barely conscious, hanging on by a thread. The boss noticed he was still alive. Zhou Yi thought, Luckily, I survived thanks to my muscle-stretching trait. It absorbed most of the damage. The boss picked up his weapon again and said with a bored look, I'm done playing around. Let's finish this. At the last moment, the protagonist blocked the boss's attack by using a skill. A system message appeared. Skill activated. Hardened skin, from the horned jungle monster. Restores damage and gives very strong defense. The enemy charged in with fast, powerful strikes, but MC blocked them all. The cockroach shouted, Your hardened skin won't last. The boss's flames will melt it soon. You still have the crystal. You can escape. But MC gritted his teeth. I'm not done yet. I have to wait for the right moment to strike. The system reported, Ability activated. Long arm of the giant snake-tailed monkey. Zhou Yi charged the boss again, but was quickly thrown back and smashed into the wall. Then the boss used lava flash, launching a stream of fire at him. MC jumped to dodge it, but the flames followed like they were alive. The system reported, Ability activated, frog leap. He tried to dodge again, but one flaming arrow still hit him. Gritting his teeth, Zhou Yi cried, A curse! I couldn't dodge it. Another message appeared. Ability activated, immortality. However, this wound causes damage over time and cannot be healed. The protagonist's face went pale. Even immortality doesn't work now. I'm in real danger. The boss surrounded him with fire and shouted, I'll finish you for good. As the flames closed in, the protagonist yelled, Then I'll take you down with me. The system reported. Ability activated, sharp horn of the horned monster. MC charged straight at the boss, shouting, This is the end of my life. He slammed into the boss's horn, cracking it slightly, but it wasn't enough. The monster prepared a final blow. Zhou Yi screamed in pain as his body was wrapped in flames. Then, the cockroach cried out, You can't beat this monster! I won't let you die! He triggered an emergency activation of the mysterious dungeon crystal to open a way out. But to his shock, the protagonist destroyed the crystal instead. Why did you do that? The cockroach shouted angrily. MC replied calmly, I was ready to die a long time ago. Suddenly, the shattered crystal released a huge burst of energy that surrounded MC's body. A blinding flash of light filled the area. The boss screamed in confusion. What is happening? A terrifying force began to wrap around the protagonist's body. Then, a system message appeared. You did not run from certain death. You passed the second test of the cockroach god. Combat form unlocked. His body was now covered in cockroach armor. He looked at his hands in shock, feeling new power flowing through him. What kind of battle form is this? He wondered. His cockroach helper explained. It was an ability that lets him boost his stats freely. He was about to explain more, but suddenly the enemy attacked. The enemy shot out blasts of lava, and when they hit, huge flames exploded. Luckily, Zhou Yi was unharmed. The cockroach explained that the battle form armor had traits from different creatures, like the shell of a cockroach, the stretchy body of a mutant toad, and the strong skin of a horned jungle beast. As Zhou Yi gained new traits, he could improve the armor more. MC looked at the armor and said that even with all that lava, it only caused small damage to the outside. The combined armor of different creatures was truly strong. The enemy laughed and said it didn't matter. Zhou would still die from lava. But then, through the smoke, a fist came flying out. Using the long arm of the snake-tailed monkey and muscle stretch, Zhou reached the enemy and punched him hard. The cockroach assistant said that in combat form, Zhou could use many traits at once to make combos. Zhou added that there's no cooldown for switching traits. He could mix them to make attacks that his enemy can't predict. The cockroach continued. In combat form, strength, endurance, and agility are all boosted 10 times. Zhou pulled his fist back and shouted happily, "This is awesome!" Meanwhile, his enemy stared at him closely and frowned. Not even a scratch? Not believing it, he rushed at MC in anger. MC watched carefully and activated dynamic vision, muscle stretch, and mantis points, bouncing back every strike. In the end, he knocked the weapon from his enemy's hand. While the enemy was still confused, Zhou kicked him into the air, jumped up, grabbed him, and slammed him hard into the ground. The enemy slowly got up, breathing heavily, clenched his fist and shouted, "Idiot!" rushing at Zhou again. But his punch was met with Zhou's. Only Zhou's was 10 times stronger. The enemy fell to the ground. Seeing his weapon behind him, he reached for it and thought that even though using it would reset the world expansion process, he needed his power back. He stabbed the spear into the ground, and lava burst out. MC stood still, watching what he would do next. Fire shot up from the ground cracks, and lava spread fast. The enemy laughed and said MC would regret not finishing him. This was his last chance. MC stayed quiet and got ready for battle. He stared closely at him. His cockroach assistant said that in combat form, MC could see weak points and the body parts where stats could be taken. The brighter the glow, the stronger the stat. The enemy's head glowed brightest. MC crouched, ready to attack, and suddenly vanished. The enemy looked around in shock. In the next moment, MC appeared right next to him and kicked him hard. The enemy flew back, smashing into the rocks and taking serious damage. Shocked, he shouted, "You're a monster!" Zhou Yi then used frog jump and mantis spike together. A sharp spike grew from his leg. He grabbed the monster's fallen horn and ate it. The enemy shouted, "He's got his power back!" Then he spread his arms, and a huge fire tornado formed behind him. He shouted that the rising fire would destroy MC completely. He would win. The tornado rushed toward MC, but he stayed calm. He held out his hand, and fire beside him began forming into a weapon. As the tornado got closer, his weapon finished forming. He swung it and scattered the flames. The enemy gasped. "No way," MC said. "Your horn tasted like black pepper." Then, with a creepy smile, he added, "I liked it." Seeing that face, the enemy panicked and fell to the ground. He cried out for his mom and said he wanted to go home. "There's a monster that eats other monsters," Zhou Yi asked. "Can you survive your own attack?" His spear was now covered in fire. The system reported, "Sharp horn of the horned monster upgraded to sharp horn of the orc." He gained the molten trait. It let him summon a spear form with an added skill. Fiery Heavens, Molten Spiral. MC used it. A fire tornado just like the enemy's appeared behind him. The monster backed away, terrified, and begged him to stop. But MC didn't care. Smiling wide, he waved his hand and sent the tornado at him. The monster's body instantly went up in flames. Soon, nothing was left. The fire died down, and only smoke remained. After the fight, a glowing amber with a monster inside appeared in front of Zhou Yi. He stared at it, curious what it was. The assistant told Zhou Yi that it was a monster seal stone, something that only drops from the strongest Lord-level monsters in the mysterious dungeon. After using it, a new form of the Imperial Guard would be unlocked, allowing him to transform into that monster. Zhou Yi was surprised. He didn't expect this fatty to still be useful. He touched the amber, and it instantly broke. The system then announced that the Imperial Guard, Fatty, had unlocked the form of a heavy-horned orc. It asked if he wanted to summon him. Zhou Yi agreed. Right away, the fatty cockroach flew out of the system window, grew rapidly, and landed in front of Zhou Yi in monster form. Fatty was shocked to see how small Zhou Yi looked now. Zhou Yi looked over his new body and smiled, saying it was amazing. Fatty quickly knelt before him, and a system window appeared above his head. Current form, heavy-horned orc guardian, Lord level. Fatty couldn't believe how different he looked. He also felt sad because he thought this form was ugly. The assistant appeared and explained that the Imperial Guard's transformation didn't just change his look. As Fatty defeats stronger monsters, he'll unlock new forms and gain more power. Suddenly, a nearby pillar cracked and started to fall. Fatty acted fast. He gathered his new strength, saved Zhou Yi from getting crushed, and threw the pillar away. Realizing how strong and large he had become, he burst into tears. He cried that he could no longer crawl under doors or peek at girls. In this form, he felt useless. Zhou Yi immediately slapped him and told him to have some ambition. "Do you want to stay a cockroach forever, only serving others? Show me your power." Dark energy formed in Fatty's hand, turning into a giant spear. He attacked Zhou Yi with it. Zhou Yi blocked the strike, but flames exploded from the impact. When the smoke cleared, Zhou Yi looked at his cracked armor in shock. Even a boss's fire attack couldn't do this much damage. The assistant smiled proudly and explained that Fatty now used no energy to maintain the dungeon. He had reached the max power of a mysterious dungeon lord. Now Zhou Yi could see the full power of the Imperial Guard. Zhou Yi tested his own strength too. He spat out fire from his hand. He realized the orc's strongest trait, the sharp horn, had been powered up. A new skill called Molten had also appeared. Fatty could now become a heavy-horned orc with full battle strength. This would be Zhou Yi's secret weapon, something to change the outcome during a crisis. Now that this was settled, the next challenge was the selection round. With these powers and a dungeon lord on his side, he could face whatever came. He was ready to join the extermination squad. 3 days later, Zhou Yi arrived at the arena. A huge crowd had already gathered. Confetti rained from the sky, and the crowd cheered for the selection contestants. Zhou Yi looked around in surprise. He didn't expect so many people. At that moment, members of the extermination squad gathered in the main observation room. Eileen spoke to Zhou Yi through an earpiece, saying that the extermination squad selection was the most important event in Nirai. It wasn't just a test to choose new members. It was also a battle for power in the city. The 4 major families of Nirai each sent a representative, and the winner of the tournament would decide which family became the city's chairman for the next 4 years, gaining real control. 4 people in cloaks walked past Zhou Yi, and he noticed them. One of them, wearing an eye patch, was Bai Haoyu from the Bai family. Eileen said his family ran the Nirai Intelligence Agency, and the people with him were agents. Then she pointed out another person, Tony Olaf from the Olaf family, a military representative. He was the top favorite to win this year. Eileen added that the military had always wanted control over the extermination squad. If they got it, they'd control all armed forces in the city. Tony walked over to Haoyu and said this tournament would help his family send another person to lead the parliament. For the 4th time. He didn't even try to hide how important this was. Haoyu calmly replied that his family still supported them. Suddenly the crowd leaned forward and started cheering. The saintess of the Esper Church, Karen User, stepped into the arena. It was the first time she had shown her face in public. Eileen explained that her power was like mind control, so her followers were blindfolded to avoid eye contact. Zhou Yi noticed something strange about them. Eileen said the church was still useful to them for now. Remote villages needed the church to stay stable, and the research from the church helped them learn more about supernatural powers. As the saintess looked around, Haoyu said he was surprised the Church of Supernaturals even allowed her to join the tournament. Tony smirked and told him not to worry. They weren't targeting the church. Then he looked at a young man who had just entered the arena with his team. It was Zhongzhe from the Zhong family. He walked toward them nervously. Tony mocked him, asking if there was no one better in his family. "Since you're here, why not give up and leave now? At least your family will still have a little respect left in Parliament." Zhongzhi shouted back that even if his family was kicked out of Parliament, he wouldn't become a dog for the military. Tony coldly replied that it didn't matter. Soon there would only be 3 major families left in Nirai. Zhou Yi realized that these families clearly didn't get along. Eileen explained that the Zhong family ran a supernatural tech research center and were allies of the extermination squad. But Zhongze was clearly the weakest of the 4 family reps. The military wanted to kick the Zhong family out of power and grow their own influence. The captain hoped Zhou Yi could place high in the tournament. That was the only way to help save the Zhong family. Zhou Yi promised to try his best. Eileen removed her earpiece and turned to Corey, asking if he really believed Zhou Yi had a chance. She looked worried. If the military won, things would get bad. Corey said that Zhou Yi had saved Lu Yao and escaped from the abyss alive. That showed he had at least some strength. Suddenly, a loud boom echoed in the sky. Fireworks exploded and confetti rained down, marking the start of the competition. The crowd cheered. Vines grew out of the ground, forming a giant flower. The bud opened, revealing Haley inside. She welcomed everyone to the extermination squad selection and introduced herself as the examiner for the first round. She said this year's test would still have 3 stages. The first was called Extreme Climb. Behind her was a steep mountain path with 100 stone steps. To pass, contestants had to reach step 10, but based on past results, 2/3 of them would likely die just trying to climb that path. The competitors grew very nervous after hearing that. Haley calmed the crowd a little, promising that the 10th unit of the extermination squad would do everything they could to keep the contestants safe. Still, everyone had to be careful. Then she waved her hand and announced the start of the first round of the extermination squad selection. After that, she vanished. The competitors didn't rush to the mountain. They stood still, looking around nervously. But then, one bold contestant stepped forward and asked with a scowl, "Who are they trying to scare? All we have to do is climb some steps. How hard can that be?" After saying this, he ran toward the stairs, and others followed him. However, the 4 family representatives didn't move. They chose to stay back and observe. Tony smirked and said they were all fools. They didn't even know they were walking toward death. Meanwhile, the brave contestant looked back and mocked the 4 family heirs, calling them cowards. He shouted that he would be the winner of the first round, but just as he stepped onto the next stair, everything changed. Suddenly, he and the other participants found themselves standing in the middle of a city. They looked around in shock, wondering how they got there. But it wasn't real. It was all an illusion. In the real world, they were frozen in place. Zhou Yi noticed this and asked, "Why aren't they moving?" Haley answered that the test wasn't just a simple mountain climb. The 100 stairs were actually made from the bones of a powerful monster called the Phantom King. Even though the Phantom King had been defeated by humans and turned to bone, he still had the power to trap anyone who stepped on the stairs inside an illusion, blocking them from reaching the top. If the person couldn't find a way to break free from the illusion quickly, they would die. In the illusion world, huge monsters appeared and started attacking the trial participants. Many of them were eaten alive, and at the same time, their real bodies collapsed on the stairs, dead. Haley waved her hand, revived the dead contestants with energy, and told them they were eliminated. Zhou Yi was shocked. Did all of them already die? He thought. Eileen contacted him through the earpiece and explained that each illusion had its own goal. Sometimes the person had to survive a certain amount of time, reach a specific place, or defeat a monster. Once they succeeded, the illusion would disappear. She warned him that once he entered the illusion, he would be cut off from her. He'd have to rely on himself. Zhou Yi got ready to climb the mountain. Meanwhile, Tony also prepared to begin. He told his team to remember their mission. They would be the first to reach the top. They stepped onto the staircase at the same time, and were instantly pulled into an illusion. In front of Tony's eyes, flames lit up and formed a glowing path to the top of the mountain. A 5-minute countdown appeared before him. Then, the flames swirled, and a huge fire dragon emerged. Tony smirked. "Looks like this illusion was made just for my powers," he thought. At this stage, he only needed to survive for 5 minutes. Feeling confident, he thought this task would be easy. He gave his soldiers the command to use Plan 1. They stretched out their hands toward the monster, and streams of water burst out, putting out the flames. Then Tony snapped his fingers, and the water instantly froze into ice, trapping the dragon. The illusion faded away, and they kept climbing the mountain. Meanwhile, Corey smiled and said things had gone well. They got through with almost no trouble. All his subordinates were top-tier awakened ones. The military had spent a lot of money to make sure they'd win the competition this year. Eileen frowned, wondering why he looked so calm. As if reading her thoughts, Corey said this wasn't the time to get nervous yet. The first 10 steps were only meant to remove those who weren't worthy of joining the extermination squad. For skilled fighters like theirs, this stage wasn't a problem. But the higher they went, the stronger the illusions would get. Sooner or later, their subordinates would fall, one by one. The real challenge would begin when they had to face everything alone. To reach the top, they'd need to destroy hundreds of obstacles with one powerful strike, using their full strength. Or they'd need the ability to stay calm and handle any situation with focus and skill. That's exactly what the main character was doing. While everyone else kept climbing the stairs, he stood still, deep in thought. The audience watching him assumed he had given up and called him a coward. But he was just focusing. Then his eyes widened. With new determination, he stepped onto the first stair, and instantly got pulled into an illusion. As he took the next step, he slipped on ice and fell into a deep crack. But he quickly recovered. Turning into his combat form, he summoned a spear and stabbed it into the ice wall, stopping himself from falling any farther. Suddenly, a shadow appeared above him. A huge flying monster had spotted him and let out a loud roar. He thought the cliff was too slippery to stand on, so he had to stay in the air and fight at the same time. He opened the system window to view his skills and selected Attack. Then, he combined 2 abilities, the poisonous spider bite and the sticky tongue. From this, he formed a whip. He swung the whip and struck the monster. As soon as the tip hit, it began absorbing the monster's power. Finally, the monster dropped into the crevice. Watching the creature fall, Zhou Yi smiled. Defeating the illusion had been easier than expected. He kept climbing the mountain, thinking that the monsters from the first level looked scary, like the ones from the dark forest. Eileen warned him that once he reached the top, the illusion monsters would be as dangerous as a guardian. But now, he was sure. He could beat them. The main character stood up and looked around. He realized he was inside a maze. Is it a labyrinth this time? He thought. The hardest part about illusions was that the environment kept changing. For an ordinary person, it would be very hard to escape a place that completely limits their powers. But he used Molten Spiral, and the fire stream burned everything in front of him. Zhou Yi thought, cockroaches can easily adapt to any place. Perfect. Just move forward in one go. A guy nearby looked at him and said mockingly, he just got to the second step and already thinks he's cool. Is he trying to act like the main character by staying behind on purpose? Zhou Yi ignored him and rushed ahead. The guys watching him gasped. How is this possible? Damn, he's amazing. The one who mocked Zhou Yi earlier quickly changed his tone and begged to go with him. This annoyed the others, who started kicking him and asked, who does he think he's talking about? Now none of them even had a chance to ask Zhou Yi to take them along. The mocking guy fell down, crying and begging them to stop hitting him. He said he was wrong, that he had been blind. Meanwhile, Corey stood with his arms crossed, watching everything. He said, he's moving faster than I expected. At this rate, he might actually reach the top. Eileen looked at him, confused. Zhou Yi can reach the top? She realized she hadn't understood anything until now. Then she remembered what Zhou Yi had said before, that he chose Plan C. They would combine their power and beat that mushroom-headed freak. He didn't seem like the kind of person who would forget someone who saved his life. Eileen thought that right now, Zhou Yi was doing something even the captain couldn't do. While all this was happening, the other players were still climbing the steps. Haley announced, Bai Haoyu has completed the course at Step 38. Karen User has also finished at Step 38. The current high score is Step 40. Right now, Tony Olov is still holding that position. Tony turned to look at Zhongze, who was out of breath and clearly afraid. He thought, those other players entered the illusion at just the right time and attacked him together. They planned this. Zhongze was only on level 31, still 9 levels away from breaking his family's record. Is this really the end? He wondered. Tony suddenly called out to him. If you bark like a dog 10 times and leave the test right now, the Zhang family can still keep their spot in parliament. You'll be able to leave with some dignity." He chuckled and added, "How about it? All you have to do is throw yourself away." Zhangze closed his eyes and started crying. But then, suddenly, he stopped in surprise. He heard footsteps. Tony turned in shock. Another person? Zhangze looked back and saw Zhou Yi standing behind him. Tony stared. Who is this guy? Zhou Yi kept walking up the steps. Zhangze looked at him and thought, he's so powerful. If I had known someone this strong lived in our city, I would have asked him to represent our family. Suddenly, Eileen gave an order to Zhou Yi. She told him to help Zhangzi. He moved forward, but Eileen ordered him to stop and asked with annoyance, "Can he hear?" Tony looked at his guards and asked, also annoyed, "Why are they gasping for breath?" The Olaf family had put a lot of effort into training them. They needed to hold on and keep moving. They were supposed to follow him for a few more steps. The goal was to reach the 50th step. Suddenly, the guards clutched their stomachs and collapsed on the stairs. Tony frowned and thought, this is risky. But they were doing well just a moment ago. He turned to look behind him and wondered, where did that guy go? At that exact moment, Zhou Yi was already standing in front of him, smiling. Tony was startled. Zhou Yi passed him and cheerfully said, "Looks like second place goes to you." Tony gritted his teeth. How is this even happening? Zhou Yi turned back and asked thoughtfully, "Why did you stop? A man shouldn't give up so easily." Tony got angry and told his group to stop and wait with him. A moment later, Haley announced that Zhou Yi was now the current leader. He had reached the 60th step. Not long after, he reached the 82nd, then the 99th. He had broken the record set by Division Commander Kolo and was about to reach the top. The crowd screamed, "Is this really happening?" They were witnessing history. One gambler shouted in shock, "Who is this guy?" Another man was crying and yelling, "Tony Olaf! I bet my entire fortune on him. Why did he lose?" The casino owner's eyes widened in shock. That kid. He remembered how Zhou Yi had said he was betting all his organs on himself winning the competition. The owner panicked. "If he wins, I'll go completely bankrupt." Zhou Yi stepped onto the last stair and turned around. "That's it?" he said. Just then, a voice crackled through his earpiece. It was Eileen, sounding annoyed. She told him to stop showing off and reminded him to go help Zhangze, but Zhou Yi acted like he didn't hear her. Was he just proud now that he'd won? Zhou Yi smiled and said, "That's not it at all." He promised he would follow her order. Then he leapt up and ran back down the stairs. The audience stared in disbelief. A guy in the crowd shouted, "What is he doing? The competition is over. Isn't he supposed to leave by the side path so he doesn't fall under the illusion again?" Zhou Yi rushed down the stairs right past Tony. What's he doing now? He didn't even reach the 50th step yet. Does he think he's capable of that? Tony kept staring, wondering, is he coming back just to mock me? Zhou Yi stopped beside Zhangze, who looked at him in confusion, thinking, what's happening? Then Zhou Yi picked Zhangze up, threw him over his shoulder, and ran up the stairs. Tony's eyes widened. Wait. Is he really going to carry someone else to the top? Is he going to fight through the illusions for two people? Zhou Yi saw a stream of lava ahead, so he quickly activated a protective shield. The next challenge was a group of monsters, but he defeated them easily. Then came the sharks, which he also passed without much trouble. Zhangze held tightly onto Zhou Yi's body. At first, he had planned to give it everything he had and not slow this guy down. But Zhou Yi's reactions and speed were unbelievably fast. Before Zhangze could even recover from the dizziness caused by the illusion, Zhou Yi was already moving. At that moment, Zhangze realized that the best way he could help this tough guy was by doing nothing. After a while, Zhou Yi placed Zhangze on the steps and let him catch his breath. Zhangze looked up in surprise and shouted, "This is the 50th step!" Zhou Yi replied, "As long as I stay ahead of Tony Olaf, everything will be fine." Zhangze started crying, bowed, and shouted, "Bro, I'll make sure you get a big reward after the competition." From now on, you're the hero of the Zhong family. Suddenly, Tony shouted, "Hey!" Zhou Yi turned around. Tony yelled, "Does he even know what he's doing? Is he trying to ruin the plan the Olaf family has been preparing for years? This brat is finished." Zhou Yi ignored his shouting and thought about what his teammate had told him earlier, that he had filled the 4 bags Zhou Yi carried with explosives. The plan was to wait until the boss was distracted by Zhou Yi and then blow him up. Then, a military officer asked Zhou Yi what had happened in the abyss and why he was the only one who came back unharmed. Zhou Yi lowered his head and thought, "These people were all so rude. Why do they always expect others to follow their orders? Isn't this just making more enemies?" Then he turned to Zhongzhe and asked, "Do you want me to help you get back at them?" Zhongzhe gave him a thumbs up and said, "Of course, I'll pay extra." Zhou Yi swung his arm and punched Tony in the face, sending him flying all the way back to the beginning. Tony thought, even the squad leader wouldn't dare go against them, so why would he? At that moment, Rhodes Olaf stood up angrily and said, "I want all the information on Zhou Yi today." Bai Genting, the head of Nirai City's Intelligence Bureau and leader of the Bai family, said, "Understood, Mr. Chairman." Rhodes Olaf, chairman of the Nirai City Parliament and leader of the Olaf family, said, "No matter who he is, since he dared to go against us, he'll pay the price." The first round of the qualifying competition ended. 2 days later, MC was sitting on his apartment couch eating potato chips. The results of the first round were surprising. Tony Olaf, who many thought would win, only came in third. Even though he was strong, after being thrown off the mountain by Zhou Yi, he climbed back up to the 49th step by himself, before collapsing. Before the competition started, Zhou Yi had bet all the magic crystals he earned in the abyss, and even all his organs, on himself. The odds were 1 to 1,000, and he won the bet. The casino boss thanked Zhou Yi for sparing his life. He had to sell everything he owned to pay Zhou Yi the 50 gold coins he owed. 1 gold coin was worth 100,000 wen. Zhou Yi had heard from Eileen that 50 coins were the total amount she earned in a year from fighting monsters. Zhou Yi also earned more money for helping the young master of the Zhong family during the tournament. Just as he was lost in thought, the door to his apartment was suddenly kicked open. Eileen had arrived. Zhou Yi screamed in surprise. Eileen pointed at him and shouted, "Are you stupid? Why are you living in this tiny apartment instead of the 3-story villa the Zhong family gave you?" Zhou Yi pointed at a building visible through the window and said, "That building is near the extermination squad's headquarters. It's very safe." Eileen, who also lived in the extermination squad building, frowned and said, "He shouldn't waste money like this. In times like these, every coin should be spent on getting stronger. There's an auction tonight. I'm taking him with me. He needs to see what the world is really like." She handed Zhou Yi a brochure. He took it, still confused, and asked, "An auction?" Later that evening, they were walking through the streets. Zhou Yi looked around nervously. Suddenly, he screamed when he saw a rat and asked, "Are they really holding the auction in a place like this? Is this for real?" Eileen explained, "The items sold at this auction can't be sold in regular markets, but they're in high demand. This is what's called the black market." Zhou Yi shouted, "Isn't that illegal? And not only are you okay with it, you're actually taking part in it." Soon they arrived at the back entrance of a building. Eileen knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened. She told Zhou Yi to stay close. They stepped inside, and the door quickly slammed shut behind them. A bright light switched on. Zhou Yi first held his head in panic, then looked around. They were surrounded by people in black robes, all pointing guns at them. A masked man stepped forward and held out his hand. "Invitation," he said. Eileen handed the brochure to the masked man. Then a man walked to the door and told them to follow him. After a while, they entered a hall that was already filled with many people. Zhou Yi said, "So many people." He sat down and asked, "First, is this even legal?" Eileen replied, "This is the Bai family's territory. It's a gray area in the law. Normal people can't come in here, so it doesn't matter." On the second floor, inside a private box owned by the Olaf family, sat their representative, Agent Hart. One of his security guards looked surprised and said, "Boss, number 17. That's Eileen from the extermination squad. Zhou Yi is with her." Hart grinned and said, "What a small world." Just then, a girl came onto the stage and said, "Dear guests, welcome. Hundreds of treasures are waiting for you at this auction. I hope tonight won't disappoint." She walked to a display covered with a red cloth, pulled it off, and revealed the first item. The tail of a beautiful mermaid. This is the flesh of a very rare monster. Ordinary people can eat it. It has strong healing effects. Everyone knows how hard it is to get this. The starting price is 1 gold coin. The bidding starts now. A man shouted happily, "Wow! What an item, and it's the first one." Another said, "This is so rare." Just then, Zhou Yi's assistant, Cockroach, popped up and reported, "Mermaid tail discovered. Item class, F." Zhou Yi frowned and said, "What kind of nonsense is this? And why do so many people want monster body parts?" Eileen frowned and said, "It helps people live longer." "Are you stupid?" The host continued, "Now we'll show items that didn't sell in past auctions. There's a special discount today. Starting price, 100 bronze coins." A man said with annoyance, "What is this trash?" Another said, "Not all monster parts are valuable. They're probably trying to trick newbies who don't understand trading." Cockroach reported more findings. Various monster body parts found. Item classes, E, A, C, D, A. Zhou Yi smiled, raised his hand and shouted, "I want it! I want it all!" The host smiled and thought, "Perfect, we found a fool." Zhou Yi smiled and thought, "I'm really lucky." Eileen said with an annoyed look, "Yeah, you're really a fool." Then the host announced, "Our next item has drawn the most attention tonight. From the sea-level abyss, belonging to the Lord of the Frost, Frang Plateau." Eileen said, "That's it. I'm done talking. What I want is finally here." The host continued, "The magic crystal of the boss of the Frost Frang Plateau, the Plateau Ice Spider. This crystal has over 50% purity, is complete, and high quality. It's perfect for anyone with ice powers. Starting price is 1 gold coin. Bidding begins." Eileen frowned, remembering her fight with that monster. She knew her ice spider blade would become much stronger if it absorbed this ice crystal. She had no plans to back down. Eileen raised her bidding sign. The host said, "Number 17, anyone else?" Hart pressed a button. The host then said, "Number 1 bids." Our most honored guest places a bid of 10 gold coins. Bids would now go up by 1 gold coin at a time. Hart chuckled and said, "So she wants the Plateau Ice Spider's magic crystal too." He clicked his tongue and added, "Young Master Tony asked for this item." Eileen frowned and looked back. She started to wonder, was the Olaf family also after this crystal? This could be a big problem. She held up the sign with the number on it. Then the host announced, "Number 17 bids 11 gold coins. Number 1 bids 15 gold coins. Number 17 bids 20 gold coins. Number 1 bids 25 gold coins." A man looked at Eileen and asked, "Is number 17 crazy?" "She's bidding against the Olaf family." Another man pulled his arm and whispered, "Shh, be quiet. She looks like someone from the extermination squad." The main character, MC, frowned and thought, "This is getting serious." Hart smirked and said, "How much money can the deputy captain of the extermination squad have?" "Maybe 30 gold coins." Eileen stood up and shouted loudly, "30 gold coins." The host said, "This is the most exciting bid of the day. Will number 17 win the treasure?" Eileen thought angrily, "This is all the money I have. Please let it be enough." But the host continued, "It's not over. Number 1 bids 35 gold coins." Eileen was disappointed and lowered her head. Zhou Yi looked at her. Just then, a guard came over and told them his boss had sent a message. Are they out of money? If they can't afford this, they shouldn't be here. Poor people don't belong in this place. Hart laughed loudly and said, "It's a shame I can't see their faces now." The host shouted, "Last chance for everyone." At that moment, the MC stood up and shouted, 50 gold coins." Everyone around was shocked. Hart said, "Now this is getting interesting. I've been in this family for many years, and no one has ever dared to bid against the Olaf family while still bargaining." The host raised her hand and said, "Number 1 counters with 55 gold coins. The famous number 1 bids 80 gold coins." Zhou Yi smiled and calmly said, 90 gold coins. Eileen quickly told him to stop. They couldn't afford that. The MC thought to himself, they only had 80 gold coins together. But then he remembered that Zhang Jie said the villa was worth at least 20 gold coins. They could still try. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. Let's figure it out first. If it doesn't work, I'll talk to Zhang Jie." Suddenly the man sitting behind them stood up and said, "My savior is right. It's just money." It was Zhang Jie. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. I'll help you with the money, no matter how much it is." Eileen turned to him, surprised. "Zhang Jie?" At the same time, a security guard leaned in and whispered to Hart, "Boss, we can't bid anymore. We've already gone past the family's budget, and now Zhang Jie is helping them." The MC turned and looked up at the balcony where Hart was sitting. With a smirk, he raised his middle finger and said, "If you can't afford it, stay out of it, you poor idiot." Hart shouted in anger. Later, on the street, Eileen said, "Thank you so much for today, Zhou Yi. I'll pay you back little by little." Zhou Yi smiled and said, "No need to be so polite. Use every coin to become stronger." Suddenly, everything around them started shaking. Zhongjia shouted, "What's happening?" Eileen took out her phone. A loud voice came from it. "Emergency! All extermination squad members must follow the Class A emergency plan. Repeat, all extermination squad members must follow the Class A emergency plan."